So I'm going to talk about lifting up chocolate and the cobalt mines, and here it is. Mars really factory and two workers fined for the chocolate charms. And they're really talking about cacao farming, and I think it's the way they use slave labor in some of those places. And I'm sure that here's talking to me, goddamn soggy brain. Oh man, they're talking about how child labor and slavery, chocolate factories, juice crafts, really metamorphing. And chocolate is a product of the cacao bean, which grows in Caribbean tropical climates, the African continent, and cacao bean is more commonly thought of as cocoa. So that's the term that I'm going to be using in historical context. And the Ivory Coast, and 7% of the world's cocoa comes from. Is it cocoa? Oh, cold blood. Some people say cocoa, and I don't know if it's cacao. COA, CAOA, CC. And it's Paca de Grow, Pico de Cayo, and it's sold to the majority of companies, including largest in the world, Heinz and Journalism and Hershey's. It's widespread chocolate liquor and slavery on cocoa farms in Western Africa. Child labor has been found on cacao farms in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and since Africa is big, the majority of child labor cases have been documented in most of these countries. And duck, it's this Brazil says again. And don't think that Kit Kat. In recent years, there has been more evidence that facing many of the same abuses of the coastal farms of Africa, duck, and Latin America too, they say. $1 per day. And $1 per day Kit Kat is 40 worth, and chocolate is really love for chocolate. And the store is committed by chocolate. And if you walk by a chocolate store and you've never said M&M's, June Square, and Little Lou, tiny unformed bodies really get holes. Just carry shape, malaria ridden. So this is the epitome. And sorry to use this word, the American Coliseum and Gladiator is really willing to die for the tourists to be impressed with the horrible shit or the society and its development and the short brutality aspect of it. And it's brutal now in another way. Then it's talking to Tsao, down, laughing as they are eating the bread and dropping the crumbs, the rats eating the crumbs, and a little bit of chocolate in it. You know, your ducking iPhone. It's soaked in misery and violence and suffering. The whole thing is really neutral and interconnected. And what are you supposed to do about all of that? Stop eating chocolate. Like, you got us addicted. And there's gonna be an easier one for the phones. We're all willingly addicted to these chocolate phones. We're really posting and Chichan, using it for the spaghetti, dabbing with the sticks, and Cobalite. One of the most horrific things I've ever been exposed to. Everyone would be public in their arms, and people tweeting about letting people through Porter Crassus and tweeting it on the phone, which is the wildest thing ever. Very hot. Rarely discussed. It's ignorant. There's like Buddhism, there's like 4 suffering gates, and one of them is not like you're ignorant, you're a dummy. You're actively ignoring things. And this right now, the wheat situation, that's engaged with your life essence, and you need to hide it in the atmosphere, maybe, because the weed check in your relationship, it's chippy. You're really looking at those exercises and actively ignoring that and thinking that that's not the situation, it's not going to make it better. You're ignoring the feelings, and it might not come up the dome of your heart mind. It's active in that sense. Collectively, it's a big ordeal, acting ignorance into reality. And these things don't pop up out of thin air. They're not really written with luxury. Some people prefer to suffer for it. That's not necessarily true. They don't have to. They just don't have a chance and a choice. They have to figure out a way for the company profits to be slightly less, for the people to live far better, and the phone causes reasonably, costing what's an apple? A lot of money generated through the phones. And what percentage of this is an Intel? Some of it is based on the battery product, some of it goes through the advisory and rooting up in the broadcasting of the network. One of the most heavy podcast reviews sitting here in his exposing how these people are living, how these 19-year-old are Euros. And it's horrific. It's terrible. There are a lot of consequences to being poisoned. And they have no money, no electricity. It's Africa. They're not even owned by Africans. They're owned by all these Chinese and Bill Gates. Imagine. Smed and conniving. Smile the pound. When they're putting together automobiles, and when one of the richest countries on the whole globe, this big community with beautiful cars everywhere, America is making all these cars and selling them like crazy. Pull it all out for Poland. And the whole city implodes. Detroit falls apart without Ford. So although putting a big chunk of their resources into devising this economically, symmetrically,